Hi, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we're reading from Kidnapped, chapters 25 and 26. Chapter 25, In Balquhidder. At the door of the first house we came to, Alan knocked, which was no very safe enterprise in such a part of the Highlands as the Braes of Balquhidder. No great clan held rule there. It was filled and disputed by small septs and broken remnants and what they called chiefless folk, driven into the wild country about the springs of Forth and Teeth by the advance of the Campbells. Here were Stuarts and MacLarens, which came to the same thing, for the MacLarens followed Alan's chief in war, and made but one clan with Appin. Here, too, were many of that old, proscribed, nameless, red-handed clan of the MacGregors. They had always been ill-considered, and now worse than ever, having credit with no side or party in the whole country of Scotland. Their chief, MacGregor of MacGregor, was in exile. The more immediate leader of them, that part of them about Balquhidder, James Moore, Rob Roy's eldest son, lay waiting his trial in Edinburgh Castle. They were in ill blood with Highlander and Lowlander, with the Grahams, the MacLarens, and the Stuarts, and Alan, who took up the quarrel of any friend, however distant, was extremely wishful to avoid them. Chance served us very well, for it was a household of MacLarens that we found, where Alan was not only welcome for his namesake, but known by reputation. Here, then, I was got to bed without delay, and a doctor fetched, who found me in a sorry plight. But whether because he was a very good doctor, or I a very young, strong man, I lay bedridden for no more than a week, and before a month I was able to take the road again with a good heart. All this time Alan would not leave me, though I often pressed him, and indeed his foolhardiness in staying was a common subject of outcry with the 2 or 3 friends that were led into the secret. He hid by day in a hole of the braes under a little wood, and at night, when the coast was clear, would come into the house to visit me. I need not say if I was pleased to see him. Mrs. MacLaren, our hostess, thought nothing good enough for such a guest, and as Duncan Dhu, which was the name of our host, had a pair of pipes in his house, and was much of a lover of music, the time of my recovery was quite a festival, and we commonly turned night into day. The soldiers let us be, although once a party of 2 companies and some dragoons went by in the bottom of the valley, where I could see them through the window as I lay in bed. What was much more astonishing, no magistrate came near me, and there was no question put of whence I came or whither I was going, and in that time of excitement I was as free of all inquiry as though I had lain in a desert. Yet my presence was known before I left to all the people in Balquhidder and the adjacent parts, many coming about the house on visits, and these, after the custom of the country, spreading the news among their neighbors. The bills, too, had now been printed. There was one pinned near the foot of my bed, where I could read my own not very flattering portrait, and in larger characters the amount of the blood money that had been set upon my life. Duncan Dhu and the rest that knew that I had come there in Alan's company could have entertained no doubt of who I was, and many others must have had their guess. For though I had changed my clothes, I could not change my age or person, and Lowland boys of 18 were not so rife in these parts of the world, and above all about that time, that they could fail to put one thing with another and connect me with the bill. So it was, at least. Other folk kept a secret among 2 or 3 near friends, and somehow it leaks out. But among these clansmen it is told to a whole countryside, and they will keep it for a century. There was but one thing happened worth narrating, and that is the visit I had of Robert Oig, one of the sons of the notorious Rob Roy. He was sought upon all sides on a charge of carrying a young woman from Balfron and marrying her, as was alleged, by force. Yet he stepped about Balquhidder like a gentleman in his own walled policy. It was he who had shot James MacLaren at the plough stilts, a quarrel never satisfied. Yet he walked into the house of his blood enemies as a rider might into a public inn. Duncan had time to pass me word of who it was, and we looked at one another in concern. You should understand it was then close upon the time of Alan's coming. The 2 were little likely to agree, and yet if we sent word or sought to make a signal, it was sure to arouse suspicion in a man under so dark a cloud as the MacGregor. He came in with a great show of civility, but like a man among inferiors, took off his bonnet to Mrs. MacLaren, but clapped it on his head again to speak to Duncan, and having thus set himself, as he would have thought, in a proper light, came to my bedside and bowed. "I am given to know, sir," says he, "that your name is Balfour." "They call me David Balfour," said I, "at your service." I would give you my name in return, sir, he replied, but it's one somewhat blown upon of late days, and it'll perhaps suffice if I tell you that I am own brother to James Moore Drummond, or MacGregor, of whom you will scarce have failed to hear. No, sir, said I, a little alarmed, nor yet of your father, MacGregor Campbell. And I sat up and bowed in bed, for I thought best to compliment him in case he was proud of having had an outlaw to his father. He bowed in return. But what I am come to say, sir, he went on, is this. In the year 45, my brother raised a part of the Gregara and marched 6 companies to strike a stroke for the good side, and the surgeon that marched with our clan and cured my brother's leg when it was broken in the brush at Preston Pans, was a gentleman of the same name precisely as yourself. He was brother to Balfour of Bath, and if you are in any reasonable degree of nearness one of that gentleman's kin, I have come to put myself and my people at your command. You are to remember that I knew no more of my descent than any cadger's dog. My uncle, to be sure, had prated of some of our high connections, but nothing to the present purpose, and there was nothing left me but that bitter disgrace of owning that I could not tell. Robin told me shortly that he was sorry he had put himself about, turned his back upon me without a sign of salutation, and as he went towards the door I could hear him telling Duncan that I was only some kinless loon that didn't know his own father. Angry as I was at these words, and ashamed of my own ignorance, I could scarce keep from smiling that a man who was under the lash of the law, and was indeed hanged some 3 years later, should be so nice as to the descent of his acquaintances. Just in the door he met Allan coming in, and the two drew back and looked at each other like strange dogs. They were neither of them big men, but they seemed fairly to swell out with pride. Each wore a sword, and by a movement of his haunch thrust clear the hilt of it so that it might be more readily grasped and the blade drawn. "Mr. Stewart, I am thinking," said Robin. "Troth, Mr. MacGregor, it's not a name to be ashamed of," answered Allan. "I did not know you were in my country, sir," says Robin. "It sticks in mind that I am in the country of my friends the MacLarens," says Allan. "That's a kittle point," returned the other. "There may be 2 words to that, but I think I will have heard that you are a man of your sword." "Unless you were born deaf, Mr. MacGregor, you will have heard a good deal more than that," says Allan. "I am not the only man that can draw steel in Appin, and when my kinsman and captain, Ardshiel, had a talk with a gentleman of your name, not so many years back, I could never hear that the MacGregor had the best of it." "Do you mean my father, sir?" says Robin. "Well, I wouldna wonder," said Allan. "The gentleman I have in my mind had the ill taste to clap Campbell to his name." "My father was an old man," returned Robin. "The match was unequal. You and me would make a better pair, sir." "I was thinking of that," said Allan. I was half out of bed, and Duncan had been hanging at the elbow of these fighting cocks, ready to intervene upon the least occasion. But when that word was uttered, it was a case of now or never, and Duncan, with something of a white face to be sure, thrust himself between. "Gentlemen," said he, "I will have been thinking of a very different matter, whatever. Here are my pipes, and here are you 2 gentlemen who are baith acclaimed pipers. It's e'en all dispute which one of you's the best. Here will be a braw chance to settle it." "Why, sir," said Allan, still addressing Robin, from whom indeed he had not so much as shifted his eyes, nor yet Robin from him. "Why, sir," says Allan, "I think I will have heard some sow of the sort. Have you music, as folk say? Are ye a bit of a piper?" "I can pipe like a MacCrimmons," cries Robin. "And that is a very bold word," quoth Allan. "I have made bolder words good before now," returned Robin, "and that against better adversaries." "It is easy to try that," says Allan. Duncan Dhu made haste to bring out the pair of pipes that was his principal possession, and to set before his guests a mutton ham and a bottle of that drink which they call Athole Brose, and which is made of old whiskey, strained honey, and sweet cream, slowly beaten together in the right order and proportion. The 2 enemies were still on the very breach of a quarrel, but down they sat, one upon each side of the peat fire, with a mighty show of politeness. MacLaren pressed them to taste his mutton ham and the wife's brose, reminding them the wife was out of Athole and had a name far and wide for her skill in that confection. But Robin put aside these hospitalities as bad for the breath. "I would have you to remark, sir," said Allan, "that I haven't broken bread for near upon 10 hours, which will be worse for the breath than any brose in Scotland." "I will take no advantages, Mr. Stewart," replied Robin. "Eat and drink. I'll follow you." Each ate a small portion of the ham and drank a glass of the brose to Mrs. McLaren, and then after a great number of civilities, Robin took the pipes and played a little spring in a very ranting manner. "Aye, ye can blow," said Allan, and taking the instrument from his rival, he first played the same spring in a manner identical with Robin's, and then wandered into variations, which as he went on, he decorated with a perfect flight of grace notes, such as pipers love and called the warblers. I had been pleased with Robin's playing. Allan's ravished me. "That's no very bad, Mr. Stewart," said the rival, "but you show a poor device in your warblers." "Me?" cried Allan, the blood starting to his face. "I give you the lie." "Do you own yourself beaten at the pipes, then," said Robin, "that ye seek to change them for the sword?" "And that's very well said, Mr. McGregor," returned Allan, "and in the meantime," laying a strong accent on the word, "I take back the lie. I appeal to Duncan." "Indeed, you need appeal to nobody," said Robin. "You're a far better judge than any McLaren in Balquhidder, for it's God's truth that you're a very creditable piper for a Stewart. Hand me the pipes." Allan did as he asked, and Robin proceeded to imitate and correct some part of Allan's variations, which it seemed that he remembered perfectly. "Aye, ye have music," said Allan gloomily. "And now be the judge yourself, Mr. Stewart," said Robin, and taking up the variations from the beginning, he worked them throughout to so new a purpose, with such ingenuity and sentiment, and with so odd a fancy and so quick a knack in the grace notes, that I was amazed to hear him. As for Allan, his face grew dark and hot, and he sat and gnawed his fingers like a man under some deep affront. "Enough," he cried. "You can blow the pipes. Make the most of that." And he made as if to rise. But Robin only held out his hand as if to ask for silence, and struck into the slow measure of a pibroch. It was a fine piece of music in itself, and nobly played. But it seems, besides, it was a piece peculiar to the Appin Stewarts and a chief favourite with Allan. The first notes were scarce out before there came a change in his face. When the time quickened, he seemed to grow restless in his seat, and long before that piece was at an end, the last signs of his anger died from him, and he had no thought but for the music. "Robin Oig," he said, when it was done, "ye are a great piper. I am not fit to blow in the same kingdom with ye. Body of me, ye have more music in your sporn than I have in my head. And though it still sticks in my mind that I could maybe show you another of it with the cold steel, I warn you beforehand, it'll no be fair. It would go against my heart to haggle a man that can blow the pipes as you can." Thereupon that quarrel was made up. All night long the brose was going and the pipes changing hands, and the day had become pretty bright, and the three men were none the better for what they had been taking before Robin as much as thought upon the road. Chapter 26. End of the Flight. We pass the 4th. The month, as I have said, was not yet out, but it was already far through August, and beautiful warm weather, with every sign of an early and great harvest, when I was pronounced able for my journey. Our money was now run to so low an ebb that we must think first of all on speed, for if we came not soon to Mr. Rankeeler's, or if when we came there he should fail to help me, we must surely starve. In Allan's view, besides, the hunt must have now greatly slackened, and the line of the Forth and even Stirling Bridge, which is the main pass over that river, would be watched with little interest. "It's a chief principle in military affairs," said he, "to go where ye are least expected. Forth is our trouble. Ye ken the saying, 'Forth bridles the wild Highlandman'? Well, if we seek to creep round by the head of that river, and come down by Kippen or Balfron, it's just precisely there that they'll be looking to lay hands on us. But if we stave on straight to the Auld Brig of Stirling, I'll lay my sword they'll let us pass unchallenged." The first night, accordingly, we pushed to the house of a McLaren in Strather, a friend of Duncan's, where we slept the 21st of the month, and whence we set forth again about the fall of night to make another easy stage. The 22nd, we lay in a heather bush on the hillside in Uamvar, within view of a herd of deer, the happiest 10 hours of sleep in a fine breathing sunshine and on bone-dry ground that I have ever tasted. That night we struck Allan Water and followed it down, and coming to the edge of the hill, saw the whole Carse of Stirling underfoot, as flat as a pancake, with the town and castle on a hill in the midst of it, and the moon shining on the links of Forth. "Now," said Allan, I kenna if ye care, but you're in your own land again. We passed the Highland line in the first hour, and now if we could but pass yon crooked water, we might cast our bonnets in the air. In Allan Water, near by where it falls into the Forth, we found a little sandy islet, overgrown with burdock, butterbur, and the like low plants that would just cover us if we lay flat. Here it was we made our camp within plain view of Stirling Castle, whence we could hear the drums beat as some part of the garrison paraded. Shearers worked all day in the field on one side of the river, and we could hear the stones going on the hooks and the voices and even the words of the men talking. It behooved us to lie close and keep silent. But the sand of the little isle was sun-warm. The green plants gave us shelter for our heads. We had food and drink in plenty, and to crown all, we were within sight of safety. As soon as the shearers quit their work and the dusk began to fall, we waded ashore and struck for the bridge of Stirling, keeping to the fields and under the field fences. The bridge is close under the castle hill, an old, high, narrow bridge with pinnacles along the parapet, and you may conceive with how much interest I looked upon it, not only as a place famous in history, but as the very doors of salvation to Allan and myself. The moon was not yet up when we came there. A few lights shone along the front of the fortress, and lower down a few lighted windows in the town. Excuse me. But it was all mighty still, and there seemed to be no guard upon the passage. I was for pushing straight across, but Allan was more wary. "It looks unco quiet," said he, "but for all that, we'll lie down here cannily behind a dike and make sure." Excuse me. So we lay for about a quarter of an hour, whiles whispering, whiles lying still and hearing nothing earthly but the washing of the water on the piers. At last there came by an old hobbling woman with a crutch stick, who first stopped a little close to where we lay and bemoaned herself and the long way she had traveled, and then set forth again up the steep spring of the bridge. The woman was so little, and the night still so dark, that we soon lost sight of her, only heard the sound of her steps and her stick, and the cough that she had by fits draw slowly farther away. "She's bound to be across now," I whispered. "Nah," said Allan. "Her foot still sounds boss upon the bridge." And just then, "Who goes?" cried a voice, and we heard the butt of a musket rattle on the stones. I must suppose the sentry had been sleeping, so that had we tried, we might have passed unseen. But he was awake now, and the chance forfeited. "This'll never do," said Allan. "This'll never do for us, David." And without another word he began to crawl away through the fields, and a little after, being well out of eye-shot, got to his feet again and struck along a road that led to the eastward. I could not conceive what he was doing, and indeed I was so sharply cut by the disappointment that I was little likely to be pleased with anything. A moment back, and I had seen myself knocking at Mr. Rankeeler's door to claim my inheritance like a hero in a ballad. And here was I back again, a wandering, hunted blackguard on the wrong side of the Forth. "Well?" said I. "Well," said Allan. "What would you have? They're none such fools as I took them for. We have still the Forth to pass, Davy. Weary fall the rains that fed and the hillsides that guided it." "And why go east?" said I. "Oh, just upon the chance," said he. "If we cannot pass the river, we'll have to see what we can do for the Firth." "There are fords up the river, and none upon the Firth," said I. "To be sure there are fords, and a bridge forby," quoth Allan. "And of what service when they are watched?" "Well," said I, "but a river can be swum." "By them that have the skill of it," returned he, "but I have yet to hear that either you or me is much of a hand at that exercise, and for my own part, I swim like a stone." "I'm not up to you in talking back, Allan," I said, "but I can see we're making bad worse. If it's hard to pass a river, it stands to reason it must be worse to pass a sea." "But there's such a thing as a boat," says Allan, "or I'm the more deceived." "Aye, and such a thing as money," says I. "But for us that have neither one nor other, they might just as well not have been invented." "You think so?" said Allan. "I do that," said I. "David," says he, "you're a man of small invention and less faith. But let me set my wits upon the bone, and if I canna beg, borrow, nor yet steal a boat, I'll make one." "I think I see ye," said I, "and what's more than all that, if you pass a bridge it can tell no tales. But if we pass the Firth, there's the boat on the wrong side. Somebody must have brought it. The countryside will all be in a biz." "Man," cried Allan, "if I make a boat, I'll make a body to take it back again." So deave me with no more of your nonsense, but walk, for that's what you've got to do, and let Alan think for you. All night then we walked through the north side of the Carse under the high line of the Ochil Mountains, and by Alloa and Clackmannan and Culross, all of which we avoided, and about 10 in the morning, mighty hungry and tired, came to the little Clechan of Limekilns. This is a place that sits near in by the waterside, and looks across the Hope to the town of the Queen's Ferry. Smoke went up from both of these and from other villages and farms upon all hands. The fields were being reaped. 2 ships lay anchored, and boats were coming and going on the Hope. It was altogether a right pleasant sight to me, and I could not take my fill of gazing at these comfortable, green, cultivated hills, and the busy people both of the field and sea. For all that, there was Mr. Rankeeler's house on the south shore, where I had no doubt wealth awaited me, and here was I upon the north, clad in poor enough attire of an outlandish fashion, with 3 silver shillings left to me of all my fortune, a price set upon my head, and an outlawed man for my sole company. "Oh, Alan," said I, "to think of it! Over there's all that heart could want waiting me. And the birds go over, and the boats go over, all that please can go, but just me only. Oh, man, but it's a heartbreak." In Limekilns we entered a small change house, which we only knew to be a public by the wand over the door, and bought some bread and cheese from a good-looking lass that was the servant. This we carried with us in a bundle, meaning to sit and eat it in a bush of wood on the seashore that we saw some 3rd part of a mile in front. As we went, I kept looking across the water and sighing to myself, and though I took no heed of it, Alan had fallen into a muse. At last he stopped in the way. "Did you take heed of the lass we bought this of?" says he, tapping on the bread and cheese. "To be sure," said I, "and a bonny lass she was." "You thought that?" cried he. "Man, David, that's good news." "In the name of all that's wonderful, why so?" says I. "What good can that do?" "Well," said Alan, with one of his droll looks, "I was rather in hopes it would maybe get us that boat." "If it were the other way about, it would be likelier, said I. "That's all that you can, you see," said Alan. "I don't want the lass to fall in love with you. I want her to be sorry for you, David. To which end there is no manner of need that she should take you for a beauty. Let me see," looking me curiously over, "I wish you were a wee thing paler. But apart from that, you'll do fine for my purpose. You have a fine hangdog, rag and tatter, clapper-maclaw kind of look to you, as if you had stolen the coat from a potato bogle. Come, right about, and back to the change house for that boat of ours." I followed him, laughing. "David Balfour," said he, "you're a very funny gentleman by your way of it, and this is a very funny employ for you, no doubt. For all that, if you have any affection for my neck, to say nothing of your own, will you perhaps be kind enough to take this matter responsibly? I am going to do a bit of play acting, the bottom ground of which is just exactly as serious as the gallows for the pair of us. So bear it, if you please, in mind, and conduct yourself accordingly." "Well, well," said I, "have it as you will." As we got near the clachan, he made me take his arm and hang upon it like one almost helpless with weariness, and by the time he pushed open the change-house door, he seemed to be half carrying me. The maid appeared, surprised, as well she might be, at our speedy return, but Alan had no words to spare for her in explanation, helped me to a chair, called for a tass of brandy with which he fed me in little sips, and then breaking up the bread and cheese, helped me to eat it like a nursery lass, the whole with that grave, concerned, affectionate countenance that might have imposed upon a judge. It was small wonder if the maid were taken with the picture we presented, of a poor, sick, overwrought lad and his most tender comrade. She drew quite near, and stood leaning with her back on the next table. "What's like wrong with him?" said she at last. Alan turned upon her, to my great wonder, with a kind of fury. "Wrong!" cries he. "He's walked more hundreds of miles than he has hairs upon his chin, and slept oftener in wet weather than dry sheets." "Wrong!" quoth she. "Wrong enough, I would think. Wrong indeed," and he kept grumbling to himself as he fed me, like a man ill-pleased. "He's young for the like of that," said the maid. "O'er young," said Alan, with his back to her. "He would be better riding," says she. "And where could I get a horse to him?" cried Alan, turning on her with the same appearance of fury. "Would you have me steal?" I thought this roughness would have sent her off in dudgeon, as indeed it closed her mouth for the time. But my companion knew very well what he was doing, and for as simple as he was in some things of life, had a great fund of roguishness in such affairs as these. "You needna tell me," she said at last. "You're gentry." "Well," said Allan, softened a little, I believe against his will, by this artless comment, "and suppose we were, did you ever hear that gentrys put money in folks' pockets?" She sighed at this, as if she were herself some disinherited great lady. "No," says she, "that's true indeed." I was all this while chafing at the part I played, and sitting tongue-tied between shame and merriment, but somehow at this I could hold in no longer, and bade Allan let me be, for I was better already. My voice stuck in my throat, for I ever hated to take part in lies, but my very embarrassment helped on the plot, for the lass no doubt set down my husky voice to sickness and fatigue. "Has he no friends?" said she, in a tearful voice. "That has he so," cried Allan, "if we could but win to them. Friends, and rich friends, beds to lie in, food to eat, doctors to see to him, and here he must tramp in the dubs and sleep in the heather like a beggarman." "And why that?" says the lass. "My dear," said Allan, "I canna very safely say, but I'll tell you what I'll do instead," says he. "I'll whistle ye a bit tune." And with that he leaned pretty far over the table, and in a mere breath of a whistle, but with a wonderful pretty sentiment, gave her a few bars of "Charlie is my darling." "Wheesh," says she, and looked over his shoulder to the door. "That's it," said Allan. "And him so young," cries the lass. "He's old enough to," and Allan struck his forefinger on the back part of his neck, meaning that I was old enough to lose my head. "It would be a black shame," she cried, flushing high. "It is what will be, though," said Allan, "unless we manage the better." At this the lass turned and ran out of that part of the house, leaving us alone together. Allan in high good humour at the furthering of his schemes, and I in bitter dudgeon at being called a Jacobite and treated like a child. "Allan," I cried, "I can stand no more of this." "You'll have to sit it then, Davy," said he, "for if you upset the pot now, you may scrape your own life out of the fire, but Allan Breck is a dead man." This was so true that I could only groan, and even my groan served Allan's purpose, for it was overheard by the lass as she came flying in again with a dish of white puddings and a bottle of strong ale. "Poor lamb," says she, and had no sooner set the meat before us than she touched me on the shoulder with a little friendly touch, as much as to bid me cheer up. Then she told us to fall to, and there would be no more to pay, for the inn was her own, or at least her father's, and he was gone for the day to Pittencrieff. We waited for no second bidding, for bread and cheese is but cold comfort, and the pudding smelled excellently well. And while we sat and ate, she took up that same place by the next table, looking on and thinking and frowning to herself, and drawing the string of her apron through her hand. "I'm thinking ye have rather a long tongue," she said at last to Allan. "Aye," said Allan, "but ye see I ken the folk I speak to." "I would never betray ye," said she, "if you mean that." "No," said he, "you're no that kind, but I'll tell you what you would do, you would help." "I couldna," she said, shaking her head. "Na, I couldna." "No," said he, "but if you could." She answered him nothing. "Look here, my lass," said Allan, "there are boats in the kingdom of Fife, for I saw two no less upon the beach, as I came in by your town's lend. Now, if we could have the use of a boat to pass under cloud of night into Lothian, and some secret, decent kind of a man to bring that boat back again and keep his counsel, there would be two souls saved, mine to all likelihood, his to a dead surety. If we lack that boat, we have but 3 shillings left in this wide world, and where to go and how to do, and what other place there is for us except the chains of a gibbet, I give you my naked word I kenna. Shall we go wanting, lassie? Are you to lie in your warm bed and think upon us when the wind gowls in the chimney and the rain turls on the roof? Are you to eat your meat by the cheeks of a red fire, and think upon this poor sick lad of mine biting his finger ends on a blay muir for cold and hunger? Sick or sound, he must aye be moving. With the death grapple at his throat, he must aye be trailing in the rain on the lang roads, and when he gances last on a rickle of cauld stones, there will be nae friends near him, but only me and God." At this appeal, I could see the lass was in great trouble of mind, being tempted to help us, and yet in some fear she might be helping malefactors. And so now I determined to step in myself, and to allay her scruples with a portion of the truth. "Did you ever hear," said I, "of Mr. Rankeillor of the Ferry?" "Rankeillor the writer?" said she. "I dare say that." Well, said I, it's to his door that I am bound, so you may judge by that if I am an ill-doer. And I will tell you more, that though I am indeed by a dreadful error in some peril of my life, King George has no truer friend in all Scotland than myself. Her face cleared up mightily at this, although Allan's darkened. That's more than I would ask, said she. Mr. Rankeillor is a Kent man. And she bade us finish our meat, get clear of the clachan as soon as we might be, and lie close in the bitwood on the sea beach. And ye can trust me, says she, I'll find some means to put you over. At this we waited for no more, but shook hands with her upon the bargain, made short work of the puddings, and set forth again from Limekilns as far as to the wood. It was a small piece of perhaps a score of elders and hawthorns and a few young ashes, not thick enough to veil us from passers-by upon the road or beach. Here we must lie, however, making the best of the brave warm weather and the good hopes we now had of a deliverance, and planning more particularly what remained for us to do. We had but one trouble all day, when a strolling piper came and sat in the same wood with us, a red-nosed, blear-eyed, drunken dog with a great bottle of whiskey in his pocket, and a long story of wrongs that had been done him by all sorts of persons, from the Lord President of the Court of Session, who had denied him justice, down to the bailies of Inverkeithing, who had given him more of it than he desired. It was impossible but he should conceive some suspicion of two men lying all day concealed in a thicket and having no business to allege. As long as he stayed there, he kept us in hot water with prying questions, and after he was gone, as he was a man not very likely to hold his tongue, we were in the greater impatience to be gone ourselves. The day came to an end with the same brightness. The night fell quiet and clear. Lights came out in houses and hamlets, and then one after another began to be put out. But it was past 11, and we were long since strangely tortured with anxieties before we heard the grinding of oars upon the rowing pins. At last we looked out and saw the lass herself coming rowing to us in a boat. She had trusted no one with our affairs, not even her sweetheart if she had one, but as soon as her father was asleep had left the house by a window, stolen a neighbor's boat, and come to our assistance single-handed. I was abashed how to find expression for my thanks, but she was no less abashed at the thought of hearing them, begged us to lose no time and to hold our peace, saying very properly that the heart of our matter was in haste and silence, and so what with one thing and another, she had set us on the Lothian shore not far from Carridon, had shaken hands with us, and was out again at sea and rowing for Limekilns before there was one word said either of her service or our gratitude. Even after she was gone we had nothing to say, as indeed nothing was enough for such kindness. Only Allan stood a great while upon the shore shaking his head. "It is a very fine lass," he said at last. "David, it is a very fine lass." And a matter of an hour later, as we were lying in a den on the seashore and I had been already dozing, he broke out again in commendations of her character. For my part, I could say nothing. She was so simple a creature that my heart smote me both with remorse and fear. Remorse because we had traded upon her ignorance, and fear lest we should have any way involved her in the dangers of our situation. We'll stop there for today and start tomorrow with chapter 27. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye-bye.